We want to respect the Fourth Commandment and our filial duties towards parents and family members and relatives. On the other hand, we also want to protect our peace. How to deal with toxic family members. This is a very, very heavy topic that comes up a lot simply because Catholics in particular feel a very, very difficult pull in two different directions. In one direction is honoring the Fourth Commandment, which is to honor your father and your mother, but that extends not just to your parents, but to all of your relatives and anyone who's in your family. So that is an obligation that is placed upon us as believers. It's important to God that we are on good terms with family members. On the other hand, the other directional pull is, and this is where the conflict comes in, we want to respect the Fourth Commandment and our filial duties towards parents and family members and relatives. On the other hand, we also want to protect our peace and we want to protect our own well-being because, let's face it, practically all of us have to deal with, at some point or another, toxic family members. And the toxic family member usually is unaware that they're toxic. It's difficult to even have a conversation about their toxicity because they can get quite defensive in even the suggestion that they're toxic. In fact, even using the word toxic is probably toxic to them. So we're really stuck. Many people struggle with this mightily. And it's not a difficult resolution to arrive at because, again, these two directions are pulling, it seems, in opposite directions. So where do we find the virtue? Right? The Greeks used to say, right, virtue stat in medio, virtue's always in the middle. Where do we find that middle ground? So the first place we have to arrive at, again, charity, love is the form of all the virtues. So what kind of love do we owe our parents, our family members, our relatives? At the very least, we owe them respect and civility and mildness and kindness. So for instance, it's important to reach out to such persons, even if they're toxic and you can't really have real substantial interactions with them, sending them a birthday greeting or Happy Easter or Merry Christmas, just to let them know that you're thinking of them and that you care about them. At the same time, sometimes you have to establish a boundary because whereas even if they want to engage with you, they don't realize that their very manner is very, very difficult. And by the way, one easy way to look at this and one way to understand this is that if the toxicity is not just towards you, there are other people in the family that are also experiencing the same kind of conflict, however implicit, that's usually a good sign that you're onto something. In other words, it's not just a personal rift between the two of you, but toxic persons usually are not just toxic to one or two individuals, they're toxic to a number of people. So it's very common in families for toxic persons to estrange themselves from not just one or two people in the family, but multiple people in the family. And so everyone in the family likes to keep their distance or has to keep their distance in order to protect their peace. Before we continue, I'd like to invite you to collaborate with us in our work of priestly formation here at St. Patrick's Seminary by making a donation using the link below. Thanks and God bless. Now let me talk about that protecting your peace part just for a second here, because I think it's a little underrated. And I think it needs to be parsed out a little bit because many times where individuals who want to try to engage a toxic person falter is that they're not protecting their peace enough. They feel as if they really need to have this more engaged relationship with the toxic person in order to meet the standard of honoring their father and their mother, which again extends just beyond parents, but also to family members and friends. And this is where people really falter because they get drawn into the vortex of dysfunctionality of the toxic person. And then Some conflict arises, some incident happens, and then they come seeking spiritual direction or advice in the confessional, wanting to know what happened. And what essentially happened is that they weren't guarded enough and that they haven't been able to detect patterns of toxicity. Most toxicity is not usually just a one-off event. Usually those things, hopefully, for persons who are generally non-toxic, can be resolved with a conversation and an apology, and you kind of move on. I'm not talking about those kinds of persons. I'm talking about persons who are always picking fights. They're always trying to create drama. There's always this intrigue that surrounds any conversation. They can't be trusted with private information. You tell them something in confidence and they broadcast it anyway. That's toxicity. And then they spread it, not just amongst in their own household, but to others in the family. They're creating all these different divisions. That's a person from whom you need to keep your distance from and protect your peace. And sometimes that just means you say, okay, I'll visit them, but just for an hour, and then I'm going to go. Or if they start something, you just change the topic and try to avoid it, and you just gingerly navigate through that interaction. But you have to accept the possibility that that person, it's not your responsibility to change that person. In fact, in my own experience of dealing with toxic people, it's very hard for me to explain to them that their very manner is toxic, because that already raises for the toxic person anger. So what happens a lot of times is the toxic person doesn't have self-awareness, immense amounts of pride. They can never apologize for their contribution to the dysfunctionality of the relationship, and it just perpetuates itself in this endless cycle. That's like a hurricane that you need to protect yourself from. And it's sad because this is a real evidence of the effects of original sin. It's just something's going on with that person, which probably, well, not your fault, but it becomes your problem because guess what? You're related. So you see the dynamic tension that's at work here. On the one hand, you want to be charitable and kind and somehow engaging, but then you also have to do it in such a way that protects your peace. Because look, if you have your own family and that interaction with a toxic family member then begins to spill over into the relationships that you have that are actually good, this is poisoning the well. And this is where you have to be very, very prudent and careful. So I have found that persons who err on the side of caution generally live much happier lives. And above all, the obligation to honor the father and the mother and the relatives and the family members, above all, is to pray for them. And I don't mean to pray for them in a sort of demeaning way, I'll pray for you. No. I mean literally, honestly saying sincere prayers for their healing, for their conversion, for their arrival at some level of self-awareness of how toxic they can be. And that's a very, very important part, too, of protecting yourself, because you are now invoking grace, divine intervention, and the healing that can only come from God in that person's life. And that's really, at the very, very minimum, what we ought to be doing for family members who are toxic and very hurtful to us. Thanks for watching. If you like this video and others we provide here at St. Patrick's Seminary, please like, subscribe, and share. And as always, thanks and God bless.